A frontier farmer teams up with an outlaw to transport 3 mentally unstable women across the country. In 1854, Mary Bee Cuddy, a teacher from New York, relocates to the Midwest to settle as a frontier farmer in a small community within the Nebraska Territory. Despite her financial success, she feels isolated and longs for a life partner. One day after work, she invites another farmer, Bob Giffen, to have dinner at her house. Hoping to impress him, she sings a song while playing her piano cloth. Unfortunately, her performance only bores him. While enjoying their meal of cheese, Cuddy suggests the idea of marriage, framing it as a chance to grow their farms together. However, the man rejects her proposal as he wants to find a wife in the East. Even when she persists, Bob is firm with his decision, explaining that he finds her too bossy and plain for him. Meanwhile, 3 women in the community start showing symptoms of prairie madness. First is the pregnant Theoline Belknap, who starts losing her mind after a harsh winter claimed the lives of cattle stock. Believing that her family will soon face starvation, she tosses her newborn down an outhouse hole. As her behavior worsens, her husband, Vester, doesn't do anything to comfort her. The second is Danish immigrant Gro Svensson, who gradually descends to madness following her mother's demise. When she desires a proper burial for her, Thor, her husband who persistently abused her in hopes of conceiving a son, carries his mother-in-law's body outside the house during winter. Following this incident, Gro begins to hallucinate her mother, burns her palm with a candle, and inflicts harm upon herself with a needle. As her behavior becomes increasingly erratic, her husband is left with no option but to restrain her. The last is Arabella Sowers, a teenage mother who suffers the heartbreaking loss of another child to diphtheria. She buries the infant alongside 2 others in the hay, which deeply shocks her husband, Garn. Consumed by grief, Arabella soon begins to hallucinate her child's cries, eventually descending into a catatonic state. The news about the 3 women soon reaches Reverend Dowd, prompting him to inform Cuddy during a visit. He then organizes a meeting in the chapel, proposing that one of the husbands be chosen through a lottery to bring the mentally disturbed women to the Ladies' Aid Society Methodist Church in Hebron, Iowa for treatment. However, Theoline's husband, Vester, refuses to participate, reasoning he can't leave his crops and children. A disappointed Cuddy calls him for his selfishness, but he only leaves the room. Because of this, she volunteers to draw the lot in his place. Dowd begins the lottery, reminding that the individual who draws the black bean will be responsible for transporting the 3 women to Iowa and back. When Cuddy draws the black bean, it's clear that Vester is the chosen one. However, Thor and Garn object, expressing their distrust towards the man. Because of this, the farmer insists on doing the task even though the elders worry it's risky for a woman to travel alone with a wagon. Dowd considers her proposal and promises to help her with what she needs. He also mentions that she'll need a homesman to assist her during the trip. After hearing Dowd's suggestion, Cuddy steps outside. As she looks at the vast field, she starts to feel nervous, realizing the journey will be long. The following morning, the farmer goes to town to pick up the wagon for transporting the women. The Buster Shaver explains its design, noting that he's installed locks to prevent the women from escaping and chains in case they need to be restrained. As Cuddy travels back to the community, Dowd catches up to her, handing her letters addressed to the closest kin of the 3 women in Iowa. He then prays for her journey, fully aware of the long, difficult, and dangerous road ahead. Meanwhile, George Briggs, a claim jumper caught stealing Bob Giffen's land, faces consequences for his actions. Thor and his men leave him on horseback with a noose around his neck. Cuddy then encounters the man and decides to free him upon his promise to obey her commands and accept the job she has for him. Before returning to the farmer's home, Briggs requests to stop by a place to collect his belongings. When they arrive at their destination, Cuddy realizes it's Bob's place and immediately realizes that the man he helped is a claim jumper. She clarifies that the house is not abandoned because it belongs to her neighbor, who's currently away in the east searching for a wife. When they reach the farm, Cuddy tasks Briggs to do some chores while she prepares their supper. As they eat, the farmer explains to the man that she will need his help in transporting 3 mentally unstable women to Iowa. Surprised by the 5-week journey, Briggs hesitates, but the woman points out that she's counting on him as her homesman. Cuddy warns him that if he abandons his responsibility, it'll reflect poorly on his character. Though the man accepts accepts the job, he asserts his right to leave whenever he pleases. The following day, before they pick up the three women, Briggs suggests hiding inside the wagon so that he doesn't get recognized by those who tried to hang him. Hearing this, Cuddy goes to the bank and puts $300 in banknotes inside an envelope. To motivate Briggs to finish the journey, she informs him that she'll mail it to Iowa, and he'll only receive it once they meet the Reverend's wife there. However, it turns out to be a lie because she quietly keeps the envelope in her bag. Cuddy picks up the first woman. Upon entering the house, she finds Arabella gazing out the window, clutching a rag doll symbolizing her lost children. Garn explains that his wife has become silent and immobile, preferring to sit in one spot. After helping his wife into the wagon, the husband presents Cuddy with a wedding gift from Arabella's grandmother. The farmer accepts the item, reassuring him that she'll keep it for the woman and promising that they'll return in a few weeks. As the wagon moves away, Arabella waves goodbye to an empty field instead of her husband. This disappoints Garn, leading him to believe that his wife doesn't love him. Next, Cuddy picks up Grow, whom Thor has confined in the barn due to her harmful behavior. After putting his wife into the wagon, the husband warns the farmer not to release the woman, fearing she might end their lives. As the duo prepares to leave, Thor recognizes Briggs, prompting him to point his gun at him. However, Cuddy intervenes and raises her rifle, explaining that she needs the claim jumper's assistance in her trip. Following this, Cuddy picks up Theoline, who's restrained in bed. She attempts to remind her that they're friends, but the ill woman fails to recognize her. Before taking her inside the wagon, Cuddy instructs the daughters to bathe and dress their mother. She then reminds them that while their mother's away, they must obey their dad and do the household chores. As they begin their journey to Iowa, a frustrated Cuddy pulls over when Grow's incessant wailing becomes too much to bear. She asks her to stop, but the woman doesn't listen and continues her noisy outbursts throughout the night. The next morning, Cuddy opens up about losing her mother at a young age and attempts to engage Briggs in conversation. However, the homesman shows little interest in the discussion. Later, they pull over to prepare a meal. When Cuddy proposes taking a different route to encounter more people who could offer help, Briggs refuses. The homesman warns her about the potential dangers posed by traders and Indians who might take advantage of them. Afterward, he awakens the ladies to help them urinate. As their journey progresses, Cuddy continues to care for the women, offering them support despite their conditions. The farmer provides water to Arabella and her doll, which the ill woman appreciates. She also bathes them in a river and washes their clothes. One morning, Cuddy spends time with Grow, feeding her and offering comfort. As she looks at the lifeless branches, she thinks about her former life in New York, recalling the abundance of trees in the state. As the group continues with their journey, they come across a deceased Indian with a buffalo hide. Despite Cuddy's objections, Briggs decides to take it to provide warmth during cold nights. That evening, while sitting by the bonfire, the homesman shares the time when he was in the army. Cuddy then shows interest, prompting him to recount a time when they won against the tribe who stole their horses. Following this, the homesman rises and performs an Indian dance to entertain the women. However, they just look at him unamused. Continuing their journey the next morning, the group spots the Pawnee in the distance. As the hostile tribe approaches, Briggs grows concerned and devises a plan to buy them off. Before facing them, the homesman gives Cuddy a gun, instructing her to end their lives if things get dire. Briggs then approaches the tribe with the farmer's special mare, Dorothy. When he sets the animal free, it runs, leading the hostile group on a chase. When the homesman returns, Cuddy is relieved yet saddened upon learning that the Pawnee might end and eat her beloved horse. Later that day, the duo leaves the three women tied to the wagon's wheels as they get branches for the night's bonfire. While the two are sleeping soundly, Theoline digs a grave and buries Arabella's ragdoll. Seconds later, Arabella awakens and kicks Theoline in the face after realizing what she did. Witnessing this, Cuddy rushes to break up the fight. The next morning, the farmer panics upon realizing that Arabella's missing, aware that the woman never leaves her spot. Examining the footprints, Briggs deduces that the woman was abducted. The homesman searches the area and soon finds a freighter riding a horse with Arabella behind him. He quickly approaches the man and explains that the woman he's with will be taken to Iowa for mental treatment. However, the freighter argues that Arabella wants to be with him, leading both men to draw their guns and aim them at each other. Seconds later, they fight on the ground and Briggs takes his sharp tool to end his enemy. However, the freighter manages to steal his weapon and choke him in the end. Suddenly, Arabella picks up the fallen gun and shoots the freighter's head, saving Briggs' life. Afterward, they take the deceased man's horse and make their way back to Cuddy. Continuing their journey, they come across the girl's grave, which has been desecrated by Indians. Devastated by such a sight, Cuddy decides to be left behind so she can restore it. Briggs agrees and leaves her a shovel and a plain horse so she can catch up to them later. After repairing the grave, the farmer sets out to find her group. However, as night falls, she realizes she's lost. The following morning, Cuddy awakens to find herself once again at the girl's grave. Overwhelmed with despair, she fights to survive, relying on the berries she can eat. After another night of traveling, she finally locates the group due to the bonfire. In tears, she immediately confronts Briggs, questioning why he didn't leave a light for her the previous night. In response, Briggs insists that he did leave a fire. Despite his explanation, Cuddy remains upset and retreats into the wagon, distressed about being alone in the prairie the previous nights. The following morning, the farmer takes her piano cloth to the riverbank to play and sing, which is witnessed by Briggs. That night, Cuddy proposes to the homesman that they marry and build a prosperous life together using her farm. However, he firmly declines, admitting he doesn't know how to farm. Despite his refusal, the farmer removes her clothes that night and awakens Briggs, begging him to make love to her. He then complies with her request. The next morning, Briggs wakes up and searches for Cuddy, only to discover that she's taken her own life by hanging herself. As the homesman buries the body, he feels disappointed, believing that the farmer broke their agreement. He then blames the three mentally ill women for Cuddy's sudden demise. While going through the farmer's bag, Briggs discovers that she had the envelope with her all along. He decides to take it and abandon his responsibility, leaving the mentally unstable trio on their own. However, when the homesman crosses the river, Arabella suddenly follows him, prompting him to stop and use his rope to save the woman from drowning. Shortly after, Theoline and Grow also follow to help Briggs take the lady to dry land. Left with no choice, the homesman decides to bring the ill women to Iowa as originally planned. In Cuddy's absence, he takes care of them, ensuring they're fed and looked after. However, after a few days, the group runs out of food. Along the way, Briggs spots the Fairfield Hotel. Upon entering, he attempts to request meals and shelter, but the attendant refuses to assist them, stating that the place is already filled. However, Briggs doubts this as there are no other guests around. When he offers to pay for the accommodation, the attendant calls the Irishman proprietor, Aloysius Duffy. The manager then informs the homesman that they cannot fulfill his request because 16 potential investors from St. Louis have booked the entire hotel. To convince him to help them, Briggs explains that he and his passengers endured a harsh winter and had gone without food for 3 days. However, despite witnessing the condition of the women, Aloysius refuses to give accommodation. Enraged, Briggs threatens him with a gun, but the attendant reveals a rifle on his back, indicating he's prepared for confrontation. The furious homesman then leaves the hotel with the 3 women. However, due to extreme hunger that night, he devises a plan. Briggs returns to the Fairfield Hotel and begins breaking the lamps to start a fire. He then shoots Aloysius in the foot, leaving him to face his untimely demise. Afterward, he takes the suckling pig and brings it to the women so they can finally eat. After crossing the river the next day, Briggs and the 3 ladies finally reach Hebron, Iowa. There, the homesman meets Alpha Carter, the Reverend's wife, who warmly welcomes him and the 3 women into her home. He then briefs her about the trio's conditions and hands her the letters for their kin. Before Briggs leaves, he approaches Arabella and tries to see if she can recognize her grandmother's wedding gift. When she doesn't take it, he gives it to the Reverend's wife for safekeeping. Afterward, he bids goodbye to the ladies. Alpha then expresses her gratitude to the homesman and assures him that the women will receive proper treatment. Before he goes on his own, Briggs donates the wagon, mules, and horses to the church. This gesture delights the Reverend's wife, who deeply appreciates his generosity. Following this, Briggs stays at a hotel in town where he meets the beautiful Tabitha Hutchinson, a diligent maid. After bathing and dressing in a suit, he visits the woodworker to request a grave marker for Cuddy. Then, Briggs returns to the hotel to eat, and Tabitha serves his food. Observing that the maid doesn't have shoes, he goes to the shoe store to purchase a pair for her. That night, Briggs joins a table and presents his $300 banknote. However, the manager, Mr. Carmichael, refuses to let him play, explaining that the bank is closed and the banknote is invalid. Because of this, he's asked to leave the establishment. Realizing that he's broke, Briggs is also unable to pay his hotel bill. Nevertheless, he gives the pair of shoes to Tabitha and compliments the gravy and biscuits she prepared for him during his stay. During their conversation, he tells her about Cuddy, whom he considers a fine woman who ever lived, subtly expressing regret for turning down her marriage proposal. After advising the maid to stay in Iowa and avoid marrying someone who ventures west, he proposes to her, to which she responds with a hesitant maybe. That night, Briggs boards a river ferry heading back west, bringing Cuddy's grave marker with him and placing it on the edge of the deck. He then sings a rowdy song, and two musicians join him, accompanying his tune with their instruments. As the people on the pier complain about the noise, Briggs fires his pistol to threaten them. He then continues singing, unaware that a bargeman has kicked Cuddy's grave marker off the edge of the deck and into the river.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.